I didn't have any trouble. I like to start with something funny, as you know. I didn't have any trouble finding jokes about food and dieting and things like that. So these are just sort of some funny little tidbits about food and dieting. This is kind of a silly one. I think it's kind of a kid's joke. A man visits his doctor. He's got celery stalks sticking out of each ear and a carrot in each nostril. He says, "Doc, I'm just not feeling well." The doctor says, "Maybe you're not eating right." I told you, kind of silly. Also, here's a new diet I've heard about that sounds very effective. It's the pasta diet. The pasta diet. The Italians have been using it for centuries. You walk pasta to bakery, pasta to candy store, pasta to ice cream shop. Yes. Here's some good quotes about food, buying food. I hate it when I think I'm buying organic, and then I get home to find out they're just regular donuts. Here's another one, a female comic. She says, "My swimsuit told me I needed to go on a diet. My swimsuit told me I needed to go on a diet, but my sweatpants said, 'Hey girl, you're fine.'" I like that one. And a couple of new words for you, new definitions. New definition for the word calories. Calories are tiny creatures that live in your closet and sew your clothes a little bit tighter. That's true. Finally, here's a word I've been needing my whole life. It's a new word called snacksident. A snacksident. It's eating an entire pizza or a bag of chips by mistake. It's a snacksident. I needed that word. We're talking about true nourishment today. That might be, if you're wondering why there's a bowl of tomatoes on the platform, that's just kind of a little image example of kind of what we're talking about. True nourishment, good nourishment. Summer is a time of so much nourishment, so many wonderful shapes, and everything from good fresh tomatoes to watermelon and corn on the cob and s'mores, and not to mention the nourishment of the stars overhead and the fireflies and the wonderful beauty of nature all around us, all the flowers and trees. Summer is just rich with nourishment. And nourishment in terms of our activities too. I try to do a little gardening every day just to get out and weed and trim and maybe plant something, a new perennial or something. It's nourishment at depth for me to garden, to be outside, to be working with dirt and plants and just experiencing nature. It nourishes my soul at depth. True nourishment. What is it for you that nourishes you at depth? Beyond the food, which is lovely as well and important for physical strength and wellness, what nourishes you mentally, spiritually? What nourishes you in the spirit? I think there's common areas. We're all a little unique in that. Not everybody loves to garden. Not everybody loves to run. But I think there are common areas. Being out in nature in one way or another. It's gardening for me, but it could be other ways. Anything that gets you outdoors. There's a lot of us feel like we got to have it. We got to have it at soul level. Might have to do with art, creativity, creative expression. I think that's one of those common areas. We need that kind of nourishment. There's movement, exercise, walking, running, tai chi, yoga, any kind of form of moving the body, movement. It seems to be one of those common areas of nourishment we need. Maybe we need all of it. We need community, seems to me. The function of a church, in addition to the spiritual teachings, is the need we have for community that nourishes us in the spirit. It's important to us, something we must have. And I think sometimes it bears a little reflection because we don't always know, we're not always keenly aware of when we're a little malnourished. Sometimes we're not getting the nourishment we need and really aren't even quite clear about that, not conscious of it, and wonder why we're not feeling well. We're not taking in enough nourishment. Seems to me that's kind of the focus I was pursuing today, is that we need good, true spiritual nourishment In the same way, we need good physical nourishment for the same reasons and in the same way, and maybe even more deeply on the spiritual level. So questions to kind of ponder about that. Are you getting the true nourishment you need to stay healthy, whole, well, feeling joyful? Or are you feeling a little malnourished? Which we feel sometimes as a kind of a restlessness, a kind of a hunger that can't quite get satisfied. And if we feel we're not getting quite enough nourishment, what can we do about that? What can we do about that? Well, first, primary teaching, I think, about true nourishment at depth, is that it's not about appearances. It's not about how things look. It's not about the surface. It's deeper than that. Jesus taught us constantly, do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. It's out of John 7. Do not judge by appearances. And he had a lot of difficulty with hypocrites, with people who looked a certain way, but they really weren't. People who prayed, piously and publicly for the reward of recognition, and he commented that's all they got, was they were seen. That was it. There was no true reward because it was all on the surface, all about appearances. It's the same thing with true nourishment in our lives. It's not a matter of appearances. It's deeper than that. I find it interesting in the world of physical nourishment, in food, in the world of nutrition. How do we know if we're getting good nourishment? We can't go by appearances, especially nowadays. You can't go by appearances. I was reading one of my favorite magazines because of the food, and my love of food is Cooking Light. Maybe some of you take it or look at it sometimes, all sorts of great recipes. They have some little articles sometimes, and it was an article on looking at the nutritional value of particularly fruits and vegetables and things like that. And quite often they look good, but they aren't necessarily very nutritional because of the way they're picked too soon, transported too far over too long a time. So much of our produce is grown for density, maximizing profits, grow as much as you can, and for appearance. Make them look good, because if they look good, we'll buy them. That's the idea. And they might have lost, as is the case with spinach, I guess, something like 70% of its nutritional value in transport, since it was picked and shipped, and the temperature shifting in transport and so on. It loses all kinds of nutritional value. It varies between the different fruits and vegetables, but they all suffer from the transport. But they might still look good. They might still look good, but have lost a lot of their real nourishment value. According to that Cooking Light article, how do we know if it's nourished? When we're looking at it and it looks so good, the appearances are good, how do we know? We know by how it tastes. We know by the flavor. We know by how it feels and tastes in our mouths, and how it goes down and how it makes us feel. The true nourishment, we can't judge it by appearances. Tomatoes are a wonderful taste test for that. Take one of these home with you and give it a good try. These are Ohio tomatoes from someplace close by from a farm market. There's no comparison between a good fresh backyard tomato and something from a mass-produced, from the local grocery store that was sent across the world. But look good. It's the same thing, I think, in mental, spiritual nourishment, deep levels of nourishment. You can't go by appearances. Jesus has a wonderful teaching about salt, which is kind of a flavor enhancer. He said, "You are the salt of the earth." It's from his Sermon on the Mount. Salt is such an important substance in that culture, not only for flavor. We still love salt, right? It's a secret of junk food, isn't it? The salt, all that wonderful salt in there. Salt has always been that source of great flavor. Also a great preserver. Salt was used for that in the days before refrigerators and so on. Salt is also a preservative as well as a flavor enhancer. So he was telling people in that wonderful talk, he was saying, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. You are the salt of the earth. Those who are in touch with that true source of nourishment within, God in you, those who are in touch with that, you are a blessing in the world. You are the flavor. You are the preserver for the future. You are wholeness. You are the salt. And the scripture kind of goes on as a little bit of a caution. If salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? It can't. It's no longer good for anything, but is thrown out and trampled underfoot. This is a caution about keep your salt flavorful. Stay in touch with source. Keep your salt salty. Be the salt. I think that's what he's saying. That's my new affirmation. Be the salt. Stay in touch with that in you, which is your true source of nourishment, and you will keep that flavor, that richness. Jesus' teachings seems to me, very much about true nourishment, nourishment at depth, the kind of nourishment he had experienced regularly through communion with God and him, to such a degree that he could say, the Father and I are one. He was deeply in touch with that source of nourishment at depth, and was often saying things to people. I want to share that with you. That's what I've come to teach. That's what I've come to share, that you will also feel that same deep nourishment. Ask and you will receive, he said, that your joy may be full. Your joy may be full. That sounds like deep nourishment to me. He offered the Samaritan woman at the well living water that will spring up into everlasting life in you. Living water. Sounds like deep nourishment. That's what he was offering. Peace I leave with you. Peace, joy, living water. He was talking about deep nourishment that comes from being in touch with God in us, with that power and presence. And he was always calling people on the appearances not being in line with the reality. Don't be fooled by appearances. He says you will know them by their fruits. Another nice food metaphor. You will know them by their fruits. How are they really? How are you really? There's nothing secret. It all comes out. You shall know them by their fruits. So we know good nourishment by how it feels, by its flavor in our lives, in our minds, how something really makes us feel, whether it's nourishing to us or not. It doesn't have to do with how things look. It has to do with how we feel it inside. Second one about true nourishment has to do with priorities. We have to prioritize what nourishes us most deeply. And I think that's where we forget sometimes. I used to do workshops pretty often in the community on finding and following your calling. And a lot of the questions we would discuss have to do with what nourishes you most deeply, because that's a clue to how your energies flow and how you want to share your creative energy in the world. What nourishes you most deeply? And quite often it came down to the very kind of things we're talking about: being outdoors, being in nature, being creative, using artistic abilities. And yet again and again, in discussion, we learned that people weren't prioritizing that in their days. They needed to be outdoors, they needed the deep nourishment of nature, but they were in a cubicle all week, and then went home and were indoors doing, housework or taking care of family or meeting responsibilities, just not finding a way to prioritize that, or not finding time to do any art or do any music. Just didn't seem to fit in terms of priorities. And it's so important, physically as well as mentally, spiritually. In the world of physical nutrition, priorities has to do with prioritizing good whole food, right? Good whole food, making sure that's where your priority is, not the corn chips I'm so fond of, not the sweets, but prioritizing what nourishes most. There's a kind of a New York Times best-selling author, it's kind of a food guru by the name of Michael Pollan. Some of you might have read some of his work. This is his most well-known quote from his book, In Defense of Food. He said, "Eat food, not too much, mostly plants." That's it. The whole thing is right there. Eat food, whole food, not processed stuff. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Great ideas there, and it kind of translate mentally, spiritually too. But it's true that in food, isn't it, that we don't really need too much if we're eating the right stuff. That's a discovery that took me years to learn. You just don't need to eat as much if you're eating good stuff with good nourishment in it. Your craving gets satisfied more quickly than having a whole lot of junk food, which never quite seems to satisfy to the degree that's needed. I think that might be part of the design of junk food. Would you agree? I think they make it so you keep craving it. There's something in it that makes you always need some more of it. It doesn't quite satisfy. But if we prioritize good nourishment, a little goes a long way. And it seems to me this is a prioritizing issue we deal with daily as we deal with food. And when I encounter a cookie or a juicy looking piece of pie or something like that, I have the opportunity to pause and reflect. Is eating this in line with my priorities? Is it going to give me the true nourishment I need? Or am I going to continue to be sort of craving more? Am I going to want another cookie and another piece of pie because it isn't quite nourishing me in the way I really need? Maybe I'll wait on that pie and have soup and salad first and then see if I still want the pie. It can follow. But the priority angle ought to be true nourishment first. It seems to me it's the same thing mentally, spiritually, isn't it? Day by day, we have that opportunity to pause and reflect in our interactions with others. If suppose we get a little irritated in traffic or in some kind of a communication, and we have the opportunity, if we seize it, we can kind of express our irritation and maybe even anger and get it out there. Sometimes there's a short-term satisfaction in that, get that off our chests. But if we're smart, it might be wise sometimes to kind of think about our prioritize, is that going to really nourish me at depth? Is that going to satisfy me a little longer term? Or would I be better nourished by holding off on that? Same thing with taking in a lot of news, for instance. We can almost get kind of addicted to taking in news every day, especially in the day where it's on our phones. You can't really get away from news now. And it can be kind of an overload if we're not watching, an overload of negativity if we're not watching it, and if we're not sort of conscious about our priorities, about how much we want to take in. Is that going to nourish me to take in news all day long? Is that going to nourish me at depth, or do I need to monitor that and be careful how much I'm taking in? Will it leave me, kind of unsatisfied and uncomfortable, taking in too much negativity, or letting myself vent too much anger or irritation at others? Will it leave me unsatisfied and uncomfortable, like too much bad food? I think it does sometimes. Those are the things that can wake us up in the middle of the night, or keep us up late because we didn't honor our highest priorities. The great news is that we have this freedom, this great capacity that we can choose to nourish ourselves at depth. We can make choices to do that day by day. I can choose to take in what nourishes me best and to not take in what doesn't nourish me. And in fact, which undermines my sense of being whole and well and having enough. I can take in what nourishes me in terms of community, in terms of movement, in terms of exercise, in terms of generosity, in terms of how I interact with others. Every day we have that opportunity to choose how we will nourish ourselves and thus how we'll build our spirits, our minds, our hearts, just in the same way that we kind of build our bodies out of what we choose to take in physically. What we choose to ingest mentally, spiritually, has the same impact. That's how we build our hearts, our souls, our spirits, by how we choose to focus our energy, attention, what we take into our minds, what we nurture in our hearts. It better be good nourishment, or we might be undermining our good health and wholeness. And the great news is that, we're all wonderful examples to one another, too. I was finding myself remembering all the people I have known who have taught me how to honor the nourishment at depth that they needed, and prioritizing that in their lives. There's people here doing that. It's a choice we can make every day. I was remembering in my grad school days, I took some Tai Chi classes down at OSU, and there was a young woman who, she was a black belt, second degree black belt or something at the time. She really excelled in her Taekwondo studies. Her name was Sunny, and she was just amazing athlete. And she was in law school, and I just was amazed. How can you do law school and work out at Taekwondo, 4 times a week? And she was always quick to say, it keeps me centered. It keeps me centered and steady and strong. It enables me to do all the rest of it. She had that priority clear. She recognized true nourishment and prioritized it. And then you have more to offer. You're being nourished. You're being nourished, so you have more energy, more time for other things. I was thinking of the Harmony Project Choir Joe and I were in for a couple of years. It's still going strong. It's twice the size now that it was when we were in it. It's a city choir downtown. If you've never heard it, they appear all around. It's 500 members now under the direction of David Brown. It's a crazy, amazing choir. I think they have to perform places like the Columbus Commons now, Nationwide Arena, big places. People from all over the city, all walks of life, all kinds of people, prioritizing getting downtown to the Lincoln Theater or the Ohio, wherever they rehearse now. Lincoln Theater's probably too small, every week for practice. Committing to community service projects, doing the performances. Nobody's getting paid, that's for sure. And everybody is finding a way to fit it into their schedules. And getting across town, some of them by public transport, prioritizing that. Why do they do it? It nourishes them at depth. It keeps them centered and in touch with that energy in them, that spirit in them. And they know it makes everything else possible, staying in touch with that. The way gardening does it for me, the way a lot of people feel nourished deeply by time spent outdoors, must have it. Must have that nourishment, the way you must have a good tomato in the summertime. You've got to have that level of nourishment. I had a friend who for years was a trail walker at one of the metro parks, which I'd not heard of before, but it's a volunteer role. You walk a certain trail in the park a couple of times a week to monitor, is everything, in shape? Is the trail still good? Is there litter? Are there tree limbs on it? Anything like that. She was a trail walker, and it got her out indoors, out into nature every week, a couple of times a week, without fail. It nurtured her deeply. In churches everywhere, people walk into churches, and I've heard it again and again. People just feel a sense of home, which to me has a lot to do with nourishment. A home is someplace you receive nourishment, something to grow on. And I'm always pleased to hear it when it means they found a vein of nourishment for them, spiritual nourishment. Maybe in the teachings that are in the church and being expressed, but also in the community, because community is deeply nourishing. Would you agree? We all have to have community in some way, shape, or form. It nourishes us at depth. We must have it. And I see that again and again, people finding communities. It could be that choir, it could be a church, it could be a 12-step group, it could be almost anything. And they find it and they realize this is true nourishment for me, I must have, and I'm going to prioritize taking it in. I'm going to prioritize receiving that nourishment, even if it's inconvenient. And here's one of the things I discovered in my life. It's often inconvenient. It's often inconvenient. Wouldn't you agree? It's often inconvenient to take in that nourishment when you find it. The church you really like might be, kind of far away, and that choir meets downtown, that's not very convenient, and it's not always convenient to get to that metro park. It's not always convenient to do this, and yet we need to commit to it. We need to prioritize it. Partly it's, I think, because we're habitual people. I prioritize my morning yoga too, because if I don't prioritize it and I let myself get away from it, it goes away. I get out of the habit. Have you had that experience?
Yeah.
No matter how deeply nourishing it is, if we kind of let ourselves get out of the habit, we can lose it. And we can kind of, forget how deeply nourishing it is to us until we remember. We can always remember God in us will probably be nudging us a little bit, in fact, or we'll be feeling that unsatisfying feeling of, I'm not taking in enough nourishment, and then we'll remember, I haven't been doing yoga, I haven't been getting outdoors, I haven't been making music, I haven't been painting. Whatever it is for you, that's nourishment you have to have. We need to prioritize it. We've got to fit it in there and make a commitment to it, even if it's inconvenient, because we need that nourishment at depth to grow our spirits in the same way we need good fresh food to grow our bodies. People everywhere too are deciding, and that option, the choice is ours every day. In churches and outside of churches, people realizing they need some kind of prayer or meditation practice to stay in touch with God in them. That's that access to source, the source of true nourishment that can't be done without. And it doesn't have to be in a church, but it needs to be somewhere. We need to take in some silence, some God connection, some moments of communion with that spirit in us if we're going to feel truly nourished and empowered to move through our days and to stay steady and unruffled in the midst of the challenges that come our way. I think that was Jesus' primary teaching, one of them, and it has to do with priorities. Strive first for the kingdom of God and its righteousness, and all the rest will be added. All the rest will be added. We won't have to worry so much about the details if we strive first for staying in touch with that God kingdom in us, staying in touch with that power and presence. All the rest becomes easier, and we are stronger and steadier as we confront anything that comes our way. So here's my affirmation for the day, and it has to do with that priority, that focus on God the good. I focus on the goodness of God, and I am nourished at depth. Would you like to join me in that? I focus on the goodness of God, and I am nourished at depth. Let's take that into prayer for a moment. Feel that truth, feel that commitment within. Day by day, we can make that choice. We can focus on what nourishes us at depth, which is the power and presence of God within us and all around us, and how that power expresses the creative energy that flows within and around us, the healing energy, the life, the abundance, generosity of life. How grateful we are to have this opportunity, moment by moment, day by day, to choose the good, to be aware of our oneness with it, and to let it guide us in our lives. Thank you, God, for your living presence in our midst. Amen.